מזמור לדוד. אדוני רואי לא אחסר, מינות אשר ירביצני, על מי מנוחות ינחלני. נפשי שובב, ינחני ומגלה צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך משענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי. תשענת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדיפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. Friends, I've chanted for you the words of our 23rd Psalm. On these difficult days, days when we are seeking comfort and solace, we often turn to the psalmist, and so I ask you to recite these words with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember him. In the opening buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember him. In the blueness of sky and in the warmth of summer, we will remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember him. In the beginning of the year, and when it ends, we will remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember him. And when we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we will remember him. So long as we live, he too will live, for he is now a part of us, as we remember Milton Steinbock. To his son, Mark, and to Fran, to his grandchildren, Jenny and Lee, also to Jonathan and Danielle, and to his great-grandson, Lennox, to all of the members of the family and so many cherished friends, we've joined together today to remember, but also to celebrate the life of your beloved Milton. Our sages have taught us that birth is a beginning, and death a destination, and life is a journey, from childhood to maturity and from youth to age, from innocence to knowing, and ignorance to awareness, from foolishness to discretion, and then, perhaps, to wisdom, from weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again, from health to sickness, and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, and from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, and pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. There is a passage in our Friday evening Shabbat prayer book. The passage reads, "Days pass, and the years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles." Milton was a miracle. Let none of us be sightless as we retell the story and journey through the life of Milton Steinbock. Milton Steinbock, or rather, Mendel Steinbach. His journey began on November 11th, 1918, the very same day that World War I ended. And this November he would have celebrated his 98th birthday. He was born in Dęblin, Poland, to Avraham and Pesia Steinbach, and Milton was one of 7 children. The home he grew up in was an observant Orthodox home where the laws of kashrut were kept and Shabbat was observed. For Milton, Mendel, as he was named at birth, for Mendel, Shabbat had a different meaning. This, of course, was Mendel's time to sneak out of the window and catch up with friends to play soccer. Each week, every Shabbos, he would do this knowing he would return home to a healthy patch on the tushy. For his love of his buddies and soccer, this seemed to be greater than his fear of his father's hand. And while Milton would tell people throughout his adult years that he was not a religious man, he was a man who was staunchly proud of his Judaism. There were 4 sisters, Luba, Malka, Rachel, and Shendel, and 2 brothers, Herschel and Yisrael Lev. Of the 9 members of his immediate family, his parents and his 6 siblings, Milton was the only one to survive the horrors of the Shoah. His parents and his 6 siblings were all murdered at the hands of the Nazis in hellish places. Words we know that make us shudder. Words like Sobibor, Treblinka, and Auschwitz. Milton wrote down his story. And there are a collection of stories that have been gathered up from Holocaust survivors. These stories are safely and respectfully stored at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Mark, you miraculously stumbled upon your father's story while visiting the museum. I think you told me when you went into this little area, you found the book that had your father's town, the stories of his town, and as you just grabbed a page and opened the book, you had opened exactly to your father's story. And your dad wrote 6 chapters on his life growing up in Poland and the war. And I wanted to share some of these excerpts with everyone here today. The title of his story is called From Camp to Camp, and it's by Mendel Steinbock. I ask you to bear with me as I share these excerpts. It was very hard for me to select which ones to share, but I think it really honors the man and his survivor instinct and the way he went forward in his life and made such a positive impact on the lives of so many others. He wrote the following. When the Germans decided to cut off half of Warsaw, I went back to Dęblin. The life in this town was horrifying. The Germans just grabbed men and women and took them to forced labor. There wasn't any place to hide. I used to come home beaten up and totally worn out. But we got used to the hardship little by little, especially because in the spring of 1940, we were still around. About half of the town's Jews were working in construction for the Germans. We rebuilt the airfield for the Germans until March of 1941. They actually paid for our work. The German power then gave an order that Jews weren't allowed to earn any money. They pulled a lot of Jews off the work. New sorrows began. Germans ordered the Jews from the ages of 13 to 55 would from now on go to forced labor. And through the Judenrat, they sent a list of those who they needed so that they could be provided. I was sent to the train station. There was an enterprise work going on that was supervised by the Schultz Company. They were laying down new tracks. A couple of hundred Jews worked very, very hard. Each day there were accidents and worse. A lot of people were severely injured. They beat us often. The life there was just unbearable. I worked there for a while until on a certain evening 2 Polish police came. They took me out of bed, sat me down, and threw me in the Demblin prison. By the morning there were 6 men in prison. They took all of us to the train station and gave us over to the commissar. This was before the German invasion of Russia. They were making preparations. All of the best Jewish houses had been taken over by the Germans, and the commissar of Puław organized a work camp where there were 400 Jews. 200 of them were from Austria. From our general area, there were another 200, and there were 6 of us who were painters from Demblin. In the camp, we stayed there about 4 months, and the Demblin Judenrat helped us with bread and marmalade. We came back to Demblin after the summer, and by that time the Germans were deep into Russia. We made it through the winter. Spring came. From the ghetto, they continually dragged people to work. Every grown-up man or woman wanted to get a chance to get into the workplace because they had already begun to liquidate the ghettos in Poland. Everybody thought that if you had work, you'd be saved. In the ghetto, we lived on Staromieska Street. My father worked for the city commissar, my sisters at the train station, and my mother remained at home with my youngest brother. The 6th of May, 1942, I came home in the middle of the day. In the morning, on the way to work, I saw that there were a lot of wives of the members of the Judenrat. They were traveling on rail cars loaded down with different things. They were traveling towards the little towns in the countryside. Therefore, I went home and I told my mother that I wanted to go with her wherever they took her. She cried and she said, "My dear child, we shouldn't go together, all of us. Maybe we'll be able to save ourselves better if we're separate." I left the house with tears in my eyes and asked God, "Where are you? Why do you leave us Jews such a bitter fate?" At night, 3/4 of the town was already gone in Demblin. The streets were empty. You could only hear the crying and the barking of dogs. The whole night we cried together. It took a few days after the deportation for those who remained in the ghetto to have the courage to go outside again. At dusk, we left the camp, and when the last Jew was over the threshold, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the SS and the Gestapo appeared. They surrounded the camp, which at that point contained about 1,500 Jews. On the tracks, there were rail cars with a locomotive that was all ready. The Germans had apparently not a lot of time because they were continually looking at their watches. They drove all the Jews to one place. From the group of skilled workers, they took out 3 workmen and pushed them over to the police barracks. They picked my name and number from the group of painters. I went into the barracks, looked through the window. It didn't take very long. From the 1,500 Jews, there only remained 500. The others, with blows, were packed into the rail cars and carried off to Treblinka. Demblin was Judenrein. There wasn't one more living Jew in the city. They even liquidated the camp in the city. My father came back from camp in the town. At the train station, my 2 sisters and younger brother remained. I tried to get them into the construction site, but I wasn't able to accomplish anything. They would only let skilled craftsmen in there. It didn't take very long after that, and the construction camp was completely filled up. They brought men from other camps into the construction site and a small number of women. In the spring of 1943, they liquidated the camp at the railroad and sent everybody to Poniatov. I alone from my family remained. I didn't know what awaited me. From day to day, life got harder. People were extremely hungry. November 1943, I fell from a scaffold. I broke my leg, and all I could do was lie around in the camp for 3 months. And in March of 1944, I went back to work. The Germans gave me a lighter work until I was able to stand on my feet. In June of 1944, the Russians liberated Lublin, and the Germans liquidated the camp at Demblin. He writes then, that from Demblin he met Chaim Kaminsky, the baker, his brother-in-law, and a son. He said, "It was my luck that they chose me with a Russian prisoner to chop wood for the SS kitchen. They cooked for all the SS men there, and they threw the peelings from the cabbage and potato into the latrine. The Russian and I used to gather up this dirty garbage and hide it close to our body under our clothes. We used to eat it at night, and that's how we were able to get through 3.5 months. After that, they sent us to Buchenwald, and from there to Scheilenborg, near the Austrian border, when I worked in a stone quarry packing stone. Then back to Buchenwald. We barely got there when the Allied armies finally were able to cut Germany in two. The closest way out was to Dachau. They stuffed us into stalls because the camp itself was overflowing. After being there a week, they stuffed us into rail cars and carried us to Mittenwald. There in the mountains, the Germans wanted to shoot everybody. But a miracle happened. The 30th of April, 1945, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the American Third Army liberated us. And I close with these words that Milton wrote. He says, "A few words about myself and my family. I was born in Demblin of fine, although poor parents. My father was called Moishe Malyaz. My mother's name was Peza Frizirka. I had 4 sisters, Luba, Malka, Rachel, Shendel, and 2 brothers, Herschel and Yisrael Leib. In 1934, my sister Luba went to Paris, and she got married to Sana Goldstein, who was the son of Mayor Martex. With their child, a son of 8 years old, they died in Auschwitz in the beginning of 1944. My sister Malka was married to a man from Pulav, Avram Kleiner. They had a 4-year-old son. She and the son died in Poniatov in 1944. Her husband lives today on a kibbutz in Israel. My mother and my youngest brother, Yisrael Leib, died in Sobibor in May of 1942. My sister Rachel and my brother Herschel died in Poniatov in 1944. And my father and sister Shendel died in Treblinka in 1944. And he closes by saying, "Honored be their memory." Days pass and years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. I think your father's survival is a miracle. He survived in a variety of ways. He painted for Nazi construction projects. He painted the homes of Nazi officers, and he survived mostly by luck. Milton was liberated, as we know, in 1945 and then went to a DP camp where he spent 3 months in a hospital being nursed back to health. He wrote, "After the liberation, I was in the hospital for 3 months. After the war, I lived in Germany for 5 years, and then I came to America." And so Milton did come to America. He was in Europe from 1946 to 1950, and he was really enjoying his freedom for the first time in a very long time. His sponsors to this country were from his hometown, and he came first to New York City, a city where he wasn't really quite a fan. He found it difficult to find work, so eventually, after several months, he made his way to Cleveland. And he was on a job as a painter, and something very special happened. He ran into a man who he knew from his days in the DP camp. And this was Abe. And while he and Abe were working, and Milton, who really came to this country simply with the clothes on his back, Milton was quite resourceful. He would do some painting for a local dry cleaner, and that's how he got a suit and some other clothing. But he and Abe would work together, and around the same time, there was a couple named Leonard and Eva Stein who came to this country from Lithuania. They got out there before the war, and they had a daughter named Shirley, who happened to be Milton's friend's niece, Abe's niece. And Abe said, "I have a girl for you to meet. She's in Detroit." And Milton said, "Okay, I'll meet her." And he did meet her. He met her in December of 1951. This is how Milton Steinbock met Shirley Stein. Their courtship was a whirlwind, as they married just 3 months later in March of 1952. And once married, he was urged by Shirley to Americanize his birth name of Mendel to Milton. Milton and Shirley made a life together. They built a home together, but it's true that the epicenter of their world was and always was you, Mark. When you entered into their world, the Steinbock family portrait was complete. Your family moved into a home on Bayard in South Euclid back in 1955, the same home that Milton stayed in up until this past January. And you said that there were the family trips to Detroit to visit your mom's side of the family, but not just your mom's side of the family, because Mark, as you described it, with your father losing all of his family, his survivor friends that he was able to connect with, they became his family. And so you visited Detroit and Toronto, Newcastle, Pennsylvania, to see these extended family members. Your parents had their favorite things. They had their way of doing things. Together they liked to make pickles. They enjoyed going out to dinner on Saturday nights, usually to Chinagate, sometimes the Old Country Buffet. And Mark, they really doted on you. They watched your every step, and they were worried. But when they finally saw that everything was okay, you attended college and graduated, your high school girlfriend, Fran, you married, and I think it was at that time your parents finally thought they could relax. And to do so, they decided in 1977 they went on their very first plane trip together, and they visited the land of Israel. But this feeling of freedom only lasted for them for a few years, because in 1981, Jenny was born, and now they had a new epicenter of their world. There's no reason to travel. Lee followed soon in 1984. And Mark, as you said to me the other night, you looked at your father's life and said he was extremely fortunate, which of course he was, but the fact that not only what he has survived and what he overcame, the fact that he lived long enough to see his grandchildren and to see them grow up, and to see them accomplish, to see Lee and Danielle marry in 2012, and Jennifer and Jonathan to marry in 2014, this was just amazing for him. And then to see a great-grandchild enter into this world, little Lennox. Just a couple weeks ago when Milton was in the hospital, Lennox went for a visit, and they were both smiling, laughing, and clapping their hands, playing their own little version of patty cake. Mark, you also mentioned a song to me. I think it was sung on the Donna Reed show, you said. But it was a song called My Dad, and it was recorded by Paul Peterson. It may have been his only hit, but this was a song that your father loved. And you think that he loved it because it was his hope that that's how you would look at him. And I'm going to share the words with everyone. It says, "He isn't much in the eyes of the world. He'll never make history. No, he isn't much in the eyes of the world, but he is the world to me. My dad. Now here is a man. To me, he's everything strong. No, he can't do wrong, my dad. My dad, how he understands when I bring him troubles to share. Oh, he's always there, my dad. When I was small, I felt 10 feet tall when I walked by his side, and everyone would say, 'That's his son,' and my heart would burst with pride. My dad, oh, I loved him so. And I only hope that someday my own son will say, 'My dad. Now here is a man. My dad. To me, he is everything strong. No, he can't do wrong. My dad.'" And that's how he was hoping to be. That was the type of father he wanted to be, that he worked to be, and ultimately that he was. We know that your dad was also quite good with his hands, and his life's work was as a painter. And while Milton painted mostly in these broad strokes, there must have been times that he would step away from his work and take a look. He would examine what was before him. And he must have taken many moments to observe and review the details of his life, where he could step back and really see the small strokes of his life. He knew that when he was able to step back from the landscape of his life, he knew that he could see these miracles, the smallest ones, and all the blessings that surrounded him. Milton's grandchildren have sweet memories of a grandfather who was, as Jenny shared, a quiet man with a quiet sense of humor. When he would sneeze, before anyone else could get a word in, your grandfather would say, "God bless me," And then he would quickly respond with, "Thank you." And Jenny and Lee, your grandfather was quite a collector. There were his pens. Hundreds of pens. I don't know, maybe thousands of pens. Any time that Milton was at a place that was handing out pens, he grabbed a lot of pens. He happily gave them away to everyone he knew, especially to Jenny and to his granddaughter, Danielle. He was also a collector of chopsticks. And whenever the family would go out to China Gate or Hoa or Hunan of Coventry, your grandfather would grab a handful of chopsticks with the promise that one day he would build a house out of them. And I have to say, thank God for J-Date and for operations like eHarmony, because they have made so many beautiful matches, people who are meant to be together, each other's bescherts. And Jenny, you decided to go on eHarmony. And I want to just read that in Jenny's profile, there's a question that says, who's the most influential person in your life? And this is what you wrote, Jenny. The most influential person in my life has been my grandfather. He is a Holocaust survivor, and despite experiencing unspeakable tragedy, he went on to live a full and happy life where he is able to see the best in people. Instead of dwelling on the past, he has always looked toward the future and how he can help others. At 93 years old, he's sharp as a tack, with a perfectly timed sarcastic wit, and he still lives independently. I hope people will say that about me when I'm 93. Well, a young man named Jonathan saw this profile. And Jonathan, as you expressed in an email to Mark, you said the following to your father-in-law. On the phone yesterday, I told you about a section of Jennifer's eHarmony profile. There were a few things about her profile that attracted me the most, and the one with her description about Milton as the most influential person in her life. Her statement about him told me so much about her as a human being. Her selection of Milton and her description gave me insight into her values and her genuine nature. In a sense, I feel that I met Jennifer and Milton together. It was that much more special when I actually met Milton for the first time at a party, a whirlybird party for Lee and Danielle. Some of my initial questions to Jennifer included learning more about Milton's story. I'm thankful to have known Milton. If it were not for him, none of us would be here, and Jennifer and I would have never met. In speaking of your grandfather, you recalled sweetly that he was a man who saved everything. Perhaps this came from his childhood years, his teenage years, the war years, the years of having less than nothing. But he saved everything, and it delighted him to give all the household items that he had saved to Lee and to Danielle and to Jenny and Jonathan. You learned that even laundry detergent had an expiration date because the things he gave you had exceeded these expiration dates. But you took these gifts because he gave them with love. And many of these items were, as I said, well past their date of use. But it didn't matter to him or to you because you knew how happy it made him to give to you. And Lee, you summed it up as you said, his every action was to make the people he loved happy. Your grandfather was especially devoted to your grandmother, Shirley. Throughout their 59 years of marriage, he was also dedicated to her, and especially dedicated in her time of need. You see, the last 3 years of her life were spent at Menorah Park. And during Shirley's last few years and following her passing in 2011, Milton became very self-sufficient. To his family's amazement, he began to cook and take care of the home that he loved so much. And in mentioning Milton's blessing of being able to live independently, I also must mention his blessing of having a daughter-in-law like Fran. Fran, we really have to drop those two words, in-law, because you were truly a daughter all those years. And you cared for Shirley for so many years. And with Milton, as you know, I've been told that you're the one who kept him going. I could say that you did so much for him, Fran, but it would just be an understatement. Your love and your respect is an example to all. Milton had his routines, he had his shtick. They were predictable and they were lovable. Always a little schnapps, a little whiskey just before dinner. And his main meal always had to be preceded with a bowl of soup. And his jokes, you might hear something dozens of times, but it was always funny. For example, Milton's fascination with the English language. Mark, you have this vivid memory of your dad always watching the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. And we all know that in Yiddish, krank, am I saying it correctly, means ill or sick. So when the evening news would end, and the announcer would say, "You're watching the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite," your father would chime in by saying, "And Mendel Gesundheit." And of course there were your father's buddies, his cronies, his Beechwood Place pals, who would gather to sit and sip coffee alongside that fountain that used to be in the center of the mall. They would meet there and share their stories, not once a week, 5 to 7 times a week. Apparently, this is where I first met Milton, because when I would stroll the mall with my children who were much younger, I would see this group of men, and as we passed, I would hear their speaking, and I would hear the accent, and I just knew they were all survivors. And so I would walk the kids over there, and I'd say, "I want you to meet these men. They're having coffee." And we would strike up a conversation, and sometimes my kids would ask them where they were from. And it meant a lot to me as a mom to know that my children met your dad and people who had lived through what they lived through. And when it comes to those stories, Milton was not afraid or inhibited about sharing his story. His video testimony is preserved in Steven Spielberg's Shoah Project. And Milton, he was that grandfather who made sure that his grandchildren understood. And whenever Lee or Jenny's class was reading and exploring the words of Anne Frank's diary, it was your grandfather who became the best show and tell. He was the living proof of what happened during those darkest years. Lee and Danielle, you gave him such a precious gift. Little Lennox, this adorable 9-month-old child, filled your grandfather's heart with indescribable joy. And Jenny and Jonathan, Lee and Daniel, and of course Lennox, I think you all know that you truly are his living legacy. The love and pride that he had for you, he knew this to be his greatest gift of all. Mark, and of course Fran, he cherished you. Mark, his only son, and Fran, the daughter of his heart. Milton's life work was his painting, and he retired at age 75. And while this special man, this painter of homes and buildings, while he did paint in broad strokes, his life and his days were blessed with a miraculous mural of detailed colors and shapes, a portrait of tragedy and triumph, and ultimately an example for all. We pray that the life of Milton Steinbock, the memory of Milton Steinbock, always be for a blessing. Amen. We take a moment of silent prayer as we ask God to accept Milton's soul. And as you are able, please rise for the memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, shochen במרומים, המשימנו חנכנה תחת כנפך השכינה, במלאות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מסעירים. את נשמת מנדל בת אברהם מוישה ופסיה, שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן, תהא מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים אסתירהו, בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, ותטרוד בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. O merciful God who dwells on high, who is full of compassion, Grant perfect rest beneath the shelter of your divine presence among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament. To our dear departed Milton Steinbock, who has gone now to his eternal home, may his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life, and grant that his memory inspire all of us to noble and consecrated living. Amen. Please be seated. Friends, anyone who wishes to make a contribution in memory of Milton, the family has suggested that you might consider the Jewish Family Service Association for Holocaust Survivors Support Fund or the Vinnie Hospice and Palliative Care at Montefiore Foundation. Following interment, which will be at the Zion Memorial Park Cemetery, the family will then receive visitors at the Steinbock home, which is located at 2719 Inverness Road in Shaker Heights. Visitation will be tonight until 8 p.m., also tomorrow, Tuesday afternoon from 2 until 4 p.m., and again from 6 until 8 p.m. On behalf of the entire family, we thank you for your love and support on this sad but important day.